Well, to continue this idea and explanation about me and how I grew up, this is a map that you'll see. And the most important state to our family, the Harmsen family, is Michigan. And on the map you're going to see basically three cities that are extremely important. Number one is Grand Rapids on the west coast by Lake Michigan. In the center, Lansing, which is also the state capital. And down in the southeast, you're going to have Ann Arbor. Why are these important? Because most of my family, the Harmsen family, lives around Grand Rapids. Secondly, I studied my first university in East Lansing, called Michigan State University, and number three is Ann Arbor, and that's where your father graduated from the University of Michigan. So if you look at the map, you're going to see Michigan basically is two peninsulas. You have the lower one is we call the Lower Peninsula, and then obviously you see the other one is Upper Peninsula. And the Lower Peninsula basically is three parts. If you look at Detroit, which is the large city, a little bit under 1 million people, there's a little bit under 10 million people total in Michigan. And then you have Detroit, and then it goes up to Flint, and this is more the industrial area. Then going west, south of Lansing and a little bit north, you have the second part, which is basically farms, rural area. And then if you look at the little, it's like the mitten, you look at Saginaw Bay there, that's the resort area in the Lower Peninsula, three parts. Now the Upper Peninsula is very unusual because the Upper Peninsula is basically rural. It's rural because they don't want industry. It's also extremely cold too, because in the Upper Peninsula you have very, very large snowdrifts. And Grand Rapids is in the lower part of the Lower Peninsula, and the winters are not so bad. And so the Upper Peninsula, people are a little bit different. Now in the Lower Peninsula, you have a lot of different people coming in. And Detroit is a multi-ethnic society very much. The University of Michigan, which is an international university, is in Ann Arbor. Now, I'll give you a quick story. When I graduated from high school, I went into the Air Force for 4 years. I finished the Air Force. I was a sergeant at that time, called non-commissioned officer, and I wanted to become educated. And so I spent 1 year at Grand Rapids Junior College, and that was my second year because the first year I got partly when I went to night school in the military down in Texas. I was in San Antonio, Texas. And then I graduated, and then in my third year I went to Lansing, Michigan, and the university there. And I spent my first year there, and then started the second year, and I was involved in an automobile accident, which I mentioned before. A drunk driver almost killed me. Took some time off. I mentioned this as a gap year. I took some time off. Eventually went back and graduated. The funny part is I graduated years later, and I had just under 5 years of college because I changed my majors several times. And I graduated in my lunch hour. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday I went for 1 hour class. I had a job, and I graduated in my lunch hour. So that was my first university. And then I did some various jobs, and then was accepted into Teacher Corps. Teacher Corps was a program for college graduates to go and teach across the United States. So I graduated into a university, and then eventually was accepted into a 3-year Teacher Corps Peace Corps program, 3 years. So instead of spending 2 years in Teacher Corps, it was 1 year in Teacher Corps, and then 2 years in Peace Corps. And so I went to the State University of New York, second university, and we had an accelerated program. We did basically one course short of 2 years in basically 2 summers and the regular year, which would mean 2 summer sessions and 2 regular sessions, which is roughly equivalent of about 3 semesters. Now, I needed 1 course to graduate. Well, I didn't have enough time to do it, so I got a teaching certificate in industrial arts. And basically that's technology education. Now, that's all changed now. It's much more sophisticated now. Years ago, it was very basic in 8 different areas. And I was certified kindergarten to 12th grade. I was a teacher, could be a teacher anywhere. I was more interested in teaching in the middle school if I was going to do it. So instead I ended up in Korea. And then eventually I came back from Korea after 2 years of Korea Peace Corps. I was Peace Corps in Korea. And then came back to the States and got a fellowship. Fellowship basically means that somebody is paying your tuition and what they call they give you a stipend, which means money for living expenses. So I got a 1-year fellowship from the United States government to study Southeast Asian history, which was majoring in Indonesian studies because that's where most of my professors did their field work. And I also studied Indonesian language for 2 years. Your grandmother came with me and I was studying, and I thought I was studying hard, but then she was studying a lot of stuff on, which means you're visiting students studying a lot of different things. She studied photography, and she studied movies, and she studied several languages, and a lot of things she was interested in. But, there's a but, she did not have regular courses, and she didn't have grades, and didn't have to write papers and do all this stuff. She just studied she was interested in. So then eventually, we went back to Korea, and I got a job teaching different places, and then eventually ended up at Korea University, Yonsei Foreign Language Institute, and then I switched over to Korea University as an assistant professor, and then associate, and then eventually moved on to Youngsook University as assistant and an associate professor, and retired eventually from Youngsook University. So I had about 28 years teaching at universities. Now, what I did, this is going to sound strange, but what I did is something unusual. At age 45, when I was at Korea University. I went to Yongsan Army Base, which is in Seoul, Korea, because the University of Maryland had a program. And now this is where the United States military is very, very different. It will educate all kinds of people. Doesn't matter what your rank is, you can get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and sometimes you can get a PhD in education. So the U.S. military is so very, very different because they educate people. And for example, when I was 4 years in Texas, I had a chance to go on Operation Bootstrap. And I was 19 years old at that time. And I had I think I had something like 12 credits, which is the required number of credits, to go for summer session. So I had 8 weeks. The summer session was 8 weeks, and I had 8 weeks. And so I would be paid my normal salary and nothing else, just basic salary. And I had to take care of all the other expenses myself. And I went back to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And for the summer session, that's six credits, 2 courses. I studied speech and English. Well, I got an A and a B in it. You can guess what the B was in. The B was in speech. And so I spent 8 weeks there, Operation Bootstrap. And the reason I was given to go because my master sergeant talked to the colonel approved it and let me go for 8 weeks. Now I lived with my parents, obviously. My parents were good enough to let me stay there, and I had 8 weeks of study, and I got 6 credits. Now in San Antonio, Texas, I also went to night school at San Antonio College, which is also a 2-year college. So when I finished the military, that I had done quite a bit of my first 2 years, and so I only spent 1 year. I spent 1 year before I went on to Michigan State as a junior. Now why did I do that? Well, conditions were very different at that time, and it was very easy to study and work. Some people had full-time jobs, and they were full-time students, and the tuition was very low. So my tuition actually was quite low when I went to Michigan State. And so, to give an example, I stayed in a room at Michigan State for several years. I mentioned I had a total of both the college and the university about 5 years. My room was about $50 a month. And so I got $100 a month on the GI Bill. That was military. I got 1 year of college, 1 month of college for every month of service. So I had 47 months, and that meant I had 36, which was maximum, 4 times 9, maximum. So for 36 months, and I used that. So I got $100 and it basically took care of what I wanted. And this is the funny part, I worked for my food. I worked in sororities and fraternities for eating. And so I would come in and I'd eat and then I would wash the dishes or something. And I loved that job because when I did it, it was so simple. I had a room and then it was $50. I had $50 to spend and I had to work for my tuition. My father did not pay for my tuition. And he loaned me money later when I had the accident and I had to pay 6% interest on the money from my accident when I had to drop out of school because of the drunk driver accident. And so I loved the job. Now again, I had to work in the kitchen, but I loved it. Why did I like it? Because I was practical. Number one, I did not have to have a kitchen to pay for a kitchen, which costs more money, because the next room in a house was a room with a kitchen, and it was more expensive than my room. It was just a straight room. Secondly, I did not have to go to the store and spend time buying stuff and buying food. And third of all, I did not have to cook the food. And fourth of all, I did not have to wash my dishes. And the requirement was I had to come in at night. At 5 o'clock, I had to be there. I had to be there at 5 o'clock at night. And so then I would eat and then I would wash the dishes. And then in the lunchtime, it was my choice. I could come or not come. It made no difference. So it was extremely practical. And they paid me $4 at one place and $5 another. Now that sounds like a little bit of money, but a candy bar like a Milky Way or Musketeer, Three Musketeer cost 10 cents. So for $1 I could buy 10 candy bars. So the thing you have to think about is not so much what you got paid, it means cost of living, it means what are the prices. So for $100 a month, I had a real good life. And I had a lot of free time. And so all I had to do was just go and it was 7 nights I had to be, no. On Sunday it was only lunch. It was 6 nights I had to be there, and Sunday noon meal I had to be there. And the rest of the time I was free, so I took care of all my food problems and eating problems. I thought it was great, great job. Now again, this is quite different to say things here in Korea, where I'm living now and making this video. But I loved it, because I did what I wanted to do and I had a lot of free time. The other thing I did is during summer vacations, I had what you call summer jobs. And I usually worked construction. I like to work in construction jobs. I worked apartment construction jobs there, and I worked in San Diego, also apartment construction. I worked in Wyoming on oil pipeline construction. And one summer I just decided, when I was at Michigan State, to have fun. And I took a summer at a summer camp of 10 weeks in New Hampshire to very, very rich people from the suburbs of New York. Now, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have their house now in the area, one of the areas of New York City suburb we got students from, and they were very, very rich. Of course, the pay was low, but it was sort of a fun job. So it was construction jobs and one fun job. And it got me a chance to travel around. I went across from the U.S. to Colorado and Wyoming once, and to Colorado another time. I bought a motorcycle and drove, and then I worked several weeks for the summer and came back. So my basically college career was very simple. My parents did not pay anything for it. And I worked summer jobs, and then I got the military, $100 a month, and I occasionally worked around the campus. I was a painter, and I was a fix-it man, and I was a carpenter, and all this stuff, just to make money. Because at that time, as I mentioned, the tuition was very, very cheap. So, for example, I worked about 7 weeks in Wyoming, and that's 7 weeks working there, getting up at starting work at 6 o'clock in the morning to show up at the warehouse, driving out into the ranch land in Wyoming, and then working on the oil pipeline till sunset. And so it was roughly 7 days a week, 11 or sometimes 13 hours a day. And it was $3 an hour, and after 40 hours you got time and a half, so it was $3 an hour and then $4.50, and I loved that job because I made enough money in 7 weeks there to finance a whole year of school. One job for 7 weeks, construction, a lot of work, and I could finance it. I worked on the engineering part, which was actually quite simple, engineering part. And I got the job engineering because I'd been to university three years at that time. I was 25 years old then. So, the basic point I'm making is years ago things were very different. Everything nowadays is much more expensive. And years ago it was much, much easier. And here's the other part. At that time, a lot of people studied liberal arts or humanities. They didn't study computers and they didn't study all this stuff because they didn't have really developed computer studies like it is now. And so you had a lot of people who were in the liberal arts and humanities studying all things like philosophy. I studied history, anthropology, psychology, history, I said that, I forget. Anyway, then also sociology and a lot of other stuff. And I found it very interesting because jobs were available. You had jobs, you could graduate with a bachelor's degree and get a lot of different kinds of jobs. So, this is the point. You have to remember this. 2 words. Times change. Times change. I repeated it. Because when you talk about the old times, they talk about what they made. My mother used to talk about searching for a dime. That's 10 cents. Back in the Depression, 1930s. Because it was extreme. A dime would buy you a lot of stuff. 10 cents would buy you a lot of stuff. And as I mentioned, I could buy a candy bar for 10 cents. Now, a candy bar, they run about 70% up to $1, depending where you buy it. So, education is there. So there's 2 parts. One is the education in the university. Secondly, education around the university. And third of all is practical life. That means jobs. And so the thing I'm telling you is when you go to university, I assume you will, probably want to, you get jobs, and jobs are really important also. Because they're important because they give you some money and they show you what it means to work. So I'm actually quite proud of my manual labor jobs. Because I made good money, manual labor jobs, and I got a chance to travel around. I went all the way, as I mentioned, from Michigan to Wyoming and to Colorado and to California. I was working in San Diego at that time. And then I also went to New Hampshire to work in a summer job, and I did a lot of traveling around. So I had a very, very good time. So going back a moment to military, and in the military, the U.S. brought in the University of Maryland, and I got a bachelor's degree in history at the University of Maryland. It took me 4 years. I graduated summa cum laude, which is highest of honors, and it took me 4 years because I was interested in it. And it was basically a year and a half. It was 46 credits, 30 credits was 1 year. And I liked that because I got a chance to study. So I was a professor and I studied from age 45 to 49, and I was the oldest graduate at that time, at 49. But I had my master's degree and 2 bachelor's degrees equivalent at that time. So altogether, your mother, this is your grandmother, wants me to give you a little bit of background. I got about 10 years university.